The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Volume 1, Section 4, The Vedic Religious Ideas. What concerns us most is the religious thoughts on soul and God and all that appertains to religion. We will take the Samvitas. These are the collection of hymns forming, as it were, the oldest Aryan literature, properly speaking, the oldest literature in the world. There may have been some scraps of literature of the older date here and there, older than that even, but not books or literatures properly so called. As a collected book, this is the oldest the world has, and the herein is portrayed the earliest feeling of the Aryans, their aspirations, the question that arose from about their manners and methods, and so on. At the very outset, we find a very curious idea. These hymns are sung in praise of different gods. Devas, as they are called, the bright ones. There is quite a number of them. One is called Indra, other is Varun, another Mitra, Parijanya, and so on. Various mythological and allegorical figures come before us, one after the other. For instance, Indra, the thunderer, striking the serpent who has withheld the rains from the mankind. Then he lets fly this his thunderbolt, the serpent is killed, and the rain comes down in showers. The people are pleased and they worship Indra with oblation. They make a sacrifice, pray, kill some animals, roast their fleshes upon spits, and offer that meat to Indra. And they had a popular plant called as som. What plant is was it was nobody knows now. It has entirely disappeared. But from the books we gather that when crushed it produced a sort of milky juice and that was fermented, and it can also be gathered that this fermented soma juice is intoxicating. This also they offer to Indra and the other gods, and they also drink it themselves. Sometimes they drank a little too much, and so did the gods. Indra on occasion got drunk. There are passages to show that Indra at one time drank so much of this som juice that he talked irrelevant words. So with Varun, he is another god, very powerful, and is in same way protecting his votaries, and they are praising him with their liberation of Som. So is the god of the war, and so on. But the popular idea that strikes one as a making the mythologies of the Samhitas entirely different from the other mythologies is that along with every one of these god is the idea of the infinity. This infinity is abstract and sometimes described as Aditya. At other times it is affixed as it were to all other gods. Take for example Indra. In some of the books you will find that Indra has a body and very strong. Sometimes he is wearing golden armor and comes down, lives and eat with his votaries, fights the demon, fights the snake, and so on. Again, in one hymn, we find that Indra has been given a very high position. He is omnipresent, omnipotent, and Indra is the heart of every being. So, with the Varun, this Varun is god of the air and is in charge of water, just as Indra was previously, and then all the sudden we find him raised up and said to be omnipresent and omnipotent, and so on. I will read one passage about Varun in his highest form, and you will understand what I mean. It has been translated into English poetry, so it is better that I read it in that form. The mighty Lord on high are deeds. The mighty Lord on high are deeds, as if at hand, as peace, as if at ends as peace. The gods know all men do. The gods know all men do. Though men would fain their act disguise. Though men would fain their act disguise. Whoever stands, whoever moves, whoever stands, whoever moves, or steals from place to place, or steals from place to place, or hides him in his secret cell, or hides him in his secret cell. The gods his movement trace. The gods his movements trace. Wherever two together plot, wherever two together plot, and dim they are alone. King Varun is there, a third, and all their schemes are known. King Varun is there, a third, and all their schemes are known. This earth is his, to him belongs those vast. This earth is his, to him belong those vast and boundless keys. Both seas within him rest, both seas within him rest, and at in that small pool he sees, and at in the small pool he lies. Whoever far beyond the sky, whoever far beyond the sky should think his way to wing, should think his way to wing. He could not dare elude the grasp of Varun the king. He would not dare elude the grasp of Varun the king. He spies, he spies descending from the skies. He spies descending from the skies, glides all this world around, glide all this world around. Their thousand eyes, all scanning sweep. There are thousand eyes, all scanning sweep to Earth's remotest bound. To Earth's remotest bound. So we can multiply example about the other gods. They all come one after the other to share the same fate. They first began as God and then they are raised to this conception as the being in whom the whole universe exists, who sees every heart, who is the ruler of the universe. And in the case of Varun, there is another idea, just the gem of one idea which came but was immediately suppressed by the Aryan mind, and that was the idea of fear. In another place, we read, they are afraid, they have sinned, and ask Varun for pardon. These ideas were never allowed for reason or you will come to understand later on to grow on Indian soil, but the gems were there sprouting. The ideas of fear, the ideas of sin. This is the idea, as you all know, is of what is called monothesis. This monothesis we see came to India at the very early period. Throughout the Samhita, in the first and the oldest part, this monothesis idea prevailed, but we shall find that it did not prove sufficient for the Aryans. They threw it aside, as it were, as a very primitive sort of idea and went further on as we Hindus think. Of course, in reading books and criticizing on the Vedas written by Europeans, the Hindu cannot help smiling when he reads that the writings of our authors are saturated with this previous education alone. Person who have sucked in has their mother's milk. The idea that is the highest idea of God is the idea of the personal God. Naturally dare not think on the lines of these ancient thinkers of India when they find that just after the Samhitas, the monotheistic idea with which the Samhitas portion is repealed was thought by the Aryans to be useless and not worthy of philosophers and thinkers, and that they struggled hard for the more philosophical and transcendental ideas. The monotheistic idea was much too human for them, although they gave it such description as the whole universe rests on him, and thou art the keeper of all hearts. The Hindus were bold, to their great credit be it said, bold thinkers in all their ideas, so bold that one spark of their thought frightened the so called bold thinkers of the West. Well, has it been said by Professor Max Muller about these thinkers that they climbed up to the heights where their lungs alone could breathe and where those of others been would have burst. These brave people followed reasons wherever it led them, no matter at what cost, never caring if all the Their race superstitions were smashed to pieces, never caring what society would think about them or talk about them, but what they thought was right and true. They preached and they talked. Before going into all these speculations of the ancient Vedic sages, we will first refer to one or two very curious instances or in the Vedas. The peculiar fact that these gods are taken up as it were, one after the other, raised and sublimated, till each has assumed the proportion of the infinite personal God of the universe, calls for an explanation. Professor Max Muller creates for it a new name as he thinks it peculiar to the Hindus. He calls it henothesis. We need not go far from the explanation. It is within the book, a few steps from a very place where we find those gods being raised and sublimated. We find the explanation also. The question arises how the Hindu mythology should be unique, so different from the others. In Babylonian or Greek mythologies, we find one god struggling upward and he assumes a position and remains there while the other gods die out. Of all the Moloch, Jehovah's become supreme, and the other Moloch are forgotten, lost forever. He is the god of the god. So too, of all the Greek gods, Zeus comes to the front and assumes a big position proportion, becomes a god of the universe, and all other gods become degraded into the minor angels. This fact was repeated in later times. The Buddhists and the Jains raised one of the prophet to the godhead, and all other gods they made subservient to Buddha or to Jina. This is the worldwide process, but there we find an exception as it were. One God is praised, and for the time being it is said that all the other gods obey his commands, and they were one who is said to be raised up by Varun is himself raised up in the next book to the highest position. They occupy the position of the personal god in turn, but the explanation is there in the book, and it is grand explanation, one that has given the theme to all subsequent thoughts in India, and one that will be the theme of the whole world of religion. Ekam sata vipra bahuda वन्दति एकं सत विप्र बहुधा vandati. That which exists in one, sages call it by various names. In all these cases where hymns were written about all these gods, the being perceived was one and the same. It was perceived one made the difference. It was the humanist, the sage, the poet who sang in different languages, different words, and praised one and the same being. That which exists is one. Sages call it by various names. Tremendous results have followed from that one verse. Some of you perhaps are surprised to think that India is the only country where there never have been a religious persecution, where never was any man disturbed for his religious faith. Thesis or athesis, monist, dualist, monotheist are there and always live unmolested. Materialists were allowed to preach from the step of Brahminical temples against the god and against God himself. They went preaching all over the land that idea of God was a mere superstition and that gods and Vedas and religion were simply superstitions invented by the priest for their own benefit, and they were allowed to do this unmolested. And so, wherever he went, Buddha tried to pull down every old thing sacred to the Hindus to the dust, and the Buddha died of deep old age. So did the Jains, who laughed at the idea of God. How can it be that there is a God? They asked. It must be more mere superstition. So on. Endless examples are there. Before the Mohammedan wave came into India, it was never known that what religion persecution was. The Hindus had only experienced it as made by foreigners or themselves. And even now, it is a patent fact that how much Hindus have helped to build Christian churches and how much readiness there is to help them. There never has been bloodshed. Even heterodox religions that have come out of India have been likewise affected. For instance, Buddhism. Buddhism is a great religion in some respect, but but to confuse Buddhism with Vedant is without meaning. Anyone may mark just the difference that existed between Christianity and the Salvation Army. There are great and good points in Buddhism, but these great points fell into hands which were not able to keep them safe. The jewels which came from philosophers the jewels which came from philosophers fell into the hands of mobs, and the mobs took up their ideas. They had a great ideal of enthusiasm, some marvelous ideas, great and humanitarian ideas, but after all, there is something else that is necessary thought and intellect to keep everything safe, wherever you see the most humanitarian ideas fall into the hands of the multitude, the first result you may notice is degeneration. It is learning and intellect that keeps things sure. Now, this Buddhism went as the first missionary religion to the world, penetrated the whole of the civilized world as it existed at that time, and never was a drop of bloodshed for that religion. We read how in China the Buddhist missionaries were persecuted and thousands were massacred by two or three successive emperors. But after that, fortune favored the Buddhists, and one of the emperor offered to take revenge on the persecutor, but the missionaries refused. All that we owe to this one verse. That is why I want you to remember it. Whom they called Indra, Mitra, Varuna, that which exists in one, sages call it by various names. It was written, nobody know at what date. It may be 8,000 years ago. In spite of all modern scholars may say it may be 9,000 years ago. Not one of these religious speculations is of the modern date, but they are as fresh today as they were when they were written, or rather fresher, for at that distance date, men are not so civilized as we know him now. He had not learned to cut his brother's throat because he differed a little in thought from himself. He had not deluded the world in blood. He had not become demon to his own brother. In the name of humanity, he did not massacre whole lots of mankind then. Therefore, this world's words comes to us today, very fresh, has great stimulations or stimulating life-giving words, much fresher than they were when they were written. That which exists is one, and sages call it by various names. We have to learn at that all religion under whatever name they may be called, either Hindu, Buddhist, Mohammedans, or Christians, have the same God, and he who derides any one of these derides his own God. That was the solution they arrived at. But as I have said, this ancient monotheistic idea did not satisfy the human Hindu mind. It did not go far enough. It did not explain the visible world. A ruler of the world does not explain the world. Certainly not. A ruler of the universe does not explain the universe, and much less an external ruler, one outside of it. He may be a moral guide, the greatest power in the universe, but that is no explanation of the universe. And the first question that we find now rising, assuming proportion, is the question about the universe. Whence did it come? How did it come? And how does it exist? Various hymns are to be found on this question struggling forward to assume form, and nowhere do we find it so poetically, so wonderfully expressed as in the following hymn. Then there was neither ought nor not, nor air nor sky, nor anything. What covered all, where rested all, then death was not, nor deathlessness, nor change to night and day. The translation loses a good deal of poetic beauty. Then death was not, nor deathlessness, nor change to night and day. The very sound of the Sanskrit is musical. That existed, that breath covering is as it were, that gods exist, but it did not begin to move. It is good to remember this one idea that it existed motionless, because we shall find how this idea sprouts up afterward in the cosmology. How, according to the Hindu metaphysics and philosophy, this whole universe is a mass of vibration, as it were, motions, and there are periods when this whole mass of motions subsides and becomes finer and finer, remaining in the state for some time. That is the state described in this hymn. It existed unmoved, without vibration, and when this creation began, this began to vibrate, and all this creation came out of it. That one breath, calm, self-sufficient, or self-sustained, naught else beyond it. Gloom existed first. Those of who Those of you who have ever been in India or any tropical country and have seen the bursting of the monsoon will understand the majesty of these words. I remember three poets attempt to picture this. Milton say, "No light, but rather darkness visible. No light, but rather darkness visible." Kalidas says, "Darkness which can be penetrated with a needle." But none comes near this Vedic description. Gloom hidden in gloom. Everything is parching and sneezing. The whole creation seems to be burning away, and for days it has been so. When one afternoon there is in one corner of horizon is speck of cloud and is less than half an hour. It has extended unto the whole earth until as it were it is covered with cloud, cloud over cloud, and then it burst into the tremendous deluge of rain. The cause of creation was described as will. That which existed at first became changed will into a will, and that will became to manifest itself as desire. This also we ought to remember, because we find that this idea of desire is said to be the cause of all we have. This idea of will has been the cornerstone of both the Buddhist and the Vedanta system, and later on has penetrated into the German philosophy and form the basic basis of Schopenhauer system of philosophy. Schopenhauer system of philosophy. It is here we first hear of it. Now first arose desire, the primal seed of mind. Sages searching in their heart by wisdom, bound found the body bound between existence and non-existence. It is a very peculiar expression. The poet ends by saying that perhaps he even does not know. We find it this in this hymn, apart from its poetic merits, that this questioning about the universe has assumed quite definite proportion, and that he minds of this mind of these sages must have advanced to such a state when all sort of common answers would not satisfy them. We find that they were not even satisfied with this governed above. There are various other hymns where the same idea comes in about how all came, and just as we have seen, when they were trying to find a governor of the universe, a personal god, they were taking up one day after another. rising him up to that position. So now we shall find that in various hymns, one or another idea is taken up and expanded infinitely and made responsible for everything in the universe. One particular idea is taken, has the support in which everything rests and exists, and that support has become all this. So on with various ideas. They tried this method with Pran, the life principle. They expanded the idea of the life principle until it became universal and infinite. It is the life principle that is supporting everything, not only the human body, but it is the light of the sun and the moon. It is the power moving everywhere, everything, the universal motive energy. Some of these attempts are very beautiful, very poetical. Some of them has he uses the beautiful morning, are marvelously lyrical in the way they picture things. Then this very desire, which, as we have just read, arose as the first primal germ of universe. We began to be stretched out until it became the universal God. But none of this idea satisfied. Here the idea is sublimated and finally abstracted into a personality. He alone existed in the beginning. He is the one Lord of all the existence. He supports this universe. He who is the author of soul. He who is the author of strength, whom all the gods worship, whose shadow is life, whose shadow is death, whom else shall we worship, whom glory the snow tops of the Himalayas declare, whose glory the ocean will all their waters proclaim. So on to goes it goes. When but as I told you just now, this idea did not satisfy them. At last we find a very peculiar position. The Aryan's mind had so long been seeking an answer to the questions from outside. They questioned everything they could find, the sun, the moon, the star, and they found all them could in this way. The whole of the nature at best could teach them only of the personal beings, who is the ruler of the universe. It could teach nothing further. In short, out of the external world, we can only get the idea of the architect, that which is called the design theory. It is not a very logical argument, as we all know. There is something childish about it, yet it is the only little bit of anything we can know but God from the external world, that this world required a builder. But this is no explanation of the universe. The materials of this world were before him, and this God wanted all these materials, and the worst objection is that he must be limited by materials. The builders could not have made a house without the material of which it is composed. Therefore, he was limited by the material. He could not do what the material enabled him to. Therefore, the God that design theories gives is at best only the architect and the limited architect of the universe. He is bound and restricted by materials. He is not independent at all. That much they had found out already, and many other minds would have rested at that. In other countries, the same thing happened. The human mind could not rest there. The thinking, grasping mind wanted to go further, but those that were backward got hold of them and did not allow them to grow. But fortunately, these Hindu sages were not the people to be knocked on their head. They wanted to get a solution, and now we find that they were leaving the external for the internal. The first thing that struck them was that it is not with the eyes and the senses that we perceive the external world. And now, anything about religion, the first idea, therefore, was to find the deficiencies, and the deficiencies was both physical and moral. And as we shall see, you do not know, says one of the sages, the cause of this universe. There has arisen a tremendous difference between you and me. The first thing that struck them was that it is not with the eyes and the senses that we perceive the external world. And now, anything about religion. The first idea, therefore, was to find a deficiency, and the deficiency was both physical and moral. As we shall see, you do not know, says one of these sages, the cause of this universe. There has arisen a tremendous difference between you and me. Why? Because you have been taking sense things and are satisfied with sense objects and with their mere ceremonials of religions, while I have now known the Purush beyond. Along with the progress of spiritual ideas that I am trying to trace for you, I can only hint to you a little about the other factors in the growth, for that has nothing to do with our subject. Therefore, I need not enlarge upon it. The growth of rituals. As those spiritual ideas progressed in arithmetical progressions, so the ritualities idea progressed in geometrical progressions. The other superstitions had been by this time developed into tremendous mass of rituals, when grew and grew till it almost killed the Hindu life. And it is still there. It has got hold of and permeated every portion of our life and made us born slaves. Yet at the same time, we find a fight against this advance of ritual from the very earliest day. The one objection raised there is this, that love for ceremonial dressing at certain times, eating at certain ways, and shows and memories of religion like this are only external religion, because you are satisfied with the senses, do not want to go beyond them. This is tremendous difficult with us and with every human being. At best, when we want to hear a spiritual thing, our standard is the senses, or a man hears things about philosophy and God and transcendental things, and after hearing about them for days, he asks, after all, how much money will they bring? How much sense enjoyment will they bring? For this enjoyment is the senses quite naturally, but that satisfaction is in the senses, says our sage. In one of the causes which has spread the vein between truth and ourself, devotion to the ceremonial satisfaction in the senses and the forming various theories have drawn a veil between ourself and truth. This is another great landmark, and we shall have to trace this idea to the end and see how it developed later on into the wonderful theory of Maya of the Vedanta. How this veil will be real explanation of the Vedanta, how the truth was there all the time, and it was only this veil that had covered it. Thus, we find that the minds of those ancient Aryan thinkers had begun a new theme. They found out that in the external world, no search would give an answer to the question. They might seek in the external world for ages, but there would be no answer to their question. So they fell back upon this other method, and according to this, they were caught or thought that these desires of the senses, desire of the ceremonials, and externalities have caused a vein to come between themselves and the truth, and that this cannot be removed by any ceremonial. They had to fall back on their own minds and analyze the mind to find the truth in themselves. The outside world failed, and they turned back upon the inside world, and then it became the real philosophy of Vedanta, from where the Vedanta philosophy began. It is the foundation stone of Vedanta philosophy. As we go on, we find that all its inquiries are inside. From the very outset, they seem to declare, look not for the truth in any religion. It is here in the human soul, the miracle of all miracles in the human soul, the aphorism of all knowledge, the mind of all existence seeks here. What is for is not here cannot be there. And they found out step by step that which is external is but a dull reflection at best of that which is inside. We shall see how they took as it were this old idea of God, the governor of the universe, who is external to the universe, and first put him inside the universe. He is not a God outside, but he is inside. And they took him from there into their own hearts. Here he is, in the heart of man, the soul of our souls, the reality in us. Several great ideas have to be understood in order to grasp properly the working of Vedanta philosophy. In the first place, it is not philosophy in the sense we speak of philosophy of Kant and Hegel. It is not one book or work of one man. Vedanta is a name of series of books written by different times, different people. Sometimes in one of these production, there will be 50 different things. Neither are they properly arranged. The thoughts, as it were, have been jotted down. Sometimes, in the midst of other extraneous things, we find some wonderful ideas. But one fact is remarkable that these ideas in the Upanishad would be always progressing in the crude old language. The working of the mind of every one of the sages has been, as it were, painted, painted just as it went. How the ideas are at the first very crude and they become finer and finer till they reach the goal of the Vedant. And this goal assumes a philosophical name. Just at first, it was the search after the Devas, the bright ones, and then it was the origin of the universe, and then the very same search is getting another name, more philosophical, clear, the unity of all things, knowing which everything else becomes known. Knowing which everything becomes known.